I have buried men I liked and lost cattle I needed, and I have never once cried about either. I want you to know that before I tell you the rest, because the rest is going to make me sound like a softer man than I am. It was the third day of a storm that didn't have the decency to end, and I was riding home half frozen and arguing with God about the price of feed, when I saw smoke coming out of a chimney that had no business being lit. The old Hannigan place, empty 2 winters, roof half gone on the north side, and somebody in there was burning something to stay alive. I almost rode past. I want you to know that too. I almost told myself it was none of mine, the way I'd told myself 100 things weren't mine until they were. What I found behind that door was a woman with a fire iron in both hands, standing between me and 7 children, and the look on her face said she had already decided to die before she'd let me past her. 7 kids, some of them hers by no blood at all, and one decision waiting on me in that doorway, a decision I have turned over every winter since, the way you turn a stone in your pocket until it goes smooth. This is the story of what she was protecting, what it cost, and the thing I did that they're still arguing about in 3 counties. Stay with me. I'm going to tell it slow because she earned slow. The door didn't have a latch anymore. I know that because I put my shoulder to it and it gave like a thing that had already given up, and I came in sideways out of the wind with snow down my collar and my hat half off, and the first thing I understood, before I understood the children, before I understood her, was the smell. Wood smoke, yes, but under it sickness. The sour, close smell of too many bodies in too small a room, of soiled cloth dried and worn again because there was no choice. The smell of people surviving rather than living. I have smelled it in lined shacks and in the back of a doctor's wagon, and I have never gotten used to it, and I hope I never do, because the day a man gets used to that smell is the day he stopped being any good. Then I saw her. She had come up off a stool by the fire fast enough to knock it over, and she had the fire iron, a long black poker, the kind that's more lever than tool, held across her body the way a man holds a rifle he doesn't quite know how to use but is fully prepared to use anyway. She was small. I'll say that plainly because it mattered. She was a small woman, narrow through the shoulders, and her wrists where they came out of a too big coat were thin enough that I could have closed a hand around either one. None of that was in her face. Her face had nothing small in it at all. "Get back." That was all she said. 2 words, and she said them low, not a scream, which frightened me more than a scream would have. A scream is fear wanting witnesses. This was fear that had stopped asking for help a long time ago. Behind her, against the far wall where the roof still held, the children went very still in the way children go still when they have learned that stillness is a kind of safety. I counted them. I count things, it's a habit my mother gave me and the cold never took, a thing I do when the rest of me wants to come apart. I keep a stub of pencil and a little ledger in my breast pocket, and on bad days I write down what I count, as if numbers were the same as control. 7. I counted 7. 2 of them small enough to still be carried. One girl maybe 12 with an arm in a sling made out of a flour sack. A boy who put himself between the littlest one and me without being told, which is a thing you can't teach a child. They either have it or they don't. And 2 of the children, I'll tell it the way I saw it, not the way I'd learned to feel about it. 2 of the children were Apache. I knew it the way everyone out here knew it then. By 100 small certainties we'd been handed like coin and never weighed. Black hair, but that was nothing. The cut of the older one's face. A pair of moccasins worn down past sense, set neatly by the fire to dry, which told me somebody in that room still cared about small dignities even now. I saw all that in a breath, and in the next breath I felt the old thing rise in me, the thing I'd been raised in, the thing the whole territory drank with its coffee. What's she doing with them? What's the trouble here? Whose are these? And I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to lie about it either, because the whole rest of this only means anything if you know what I had to come up out of. "I'm not here for trouble," I said. Everyone says that. She didn't lower the iron right before. I held my hands out empty. Snow was still melting off me and dripping on a floor that already had a dark stain spreading where the roof let the weather in. Lady, it's 20 below and falling. I saw your smoke. I've got a place 40 minutes ride east if the horse holds. I'm not the law and I'm not anybody's husband come looking and I'm not. I stopped. I've been about to say I'm not Indian agency, and something in her stance told me that word would have been worse than the cold. I'm a rancher, I said instead. My name's Calder, Tom Calder. Nothing. The fire popped. One of the small ones started to cry, and the 12-year-old girl with the sling pulled it against her without looking, a motion so practiced it had stopped being a decision. How long have you been out here? I asked. Long enough. Then, because I suppose even a body holding a poker gets tired of holding it, 11 days. 11 days. I did the arithmetic before I could stop myself. 11 days, 7 children in a house with no north roof, on the front edge of the worst storm I'd seen in 9 winters. I took the pencil out. I didn't write anything. I just held it, which is a thing I do, and her eyes went to it sharp, like she thought it might be a weapon. And I understood then that she had reached the place where every object in the world had been sorted into things that could hurt her children and things that couldn't, and there was nothing left over. What's your name? I said, not a question, a handhold. She studied me a long moment. The fire iron came down maybe 2 inches. Marisol, she said, Marisol Vega. And then, before I could make anything of it, don't ask whose they are. So of course, that's the one thing I couldn't stop thinking. I'll tell you now what I learned over the next several hours, though I didn't learn it clean, and I didn't learn it in order, and I had to earn every piece of it. She didn't sit me down and explain herself. People who have been doubted their whole lives don't explain. They let you watch, and they decide based on what you do with what you see. What I did first was the only thing I had any standing to do. I went back out into the storm. My saddlebags had jerky and hardtack, and a wedge of cheese gone half to wax, and a flask of something my brother sends me at Christmas that I'd been saving for no good reason. I brought the horse around to the lean side of the house out of the worst of the wind, and I stripped my own bedroll and a wool blanket I'd been a fool not to be wearing, and I carried it all back in, and I set it down in the middle of the floor without a word and went back out for more. 3 trips, snow stinging my face so hard it felt like sand, and the whole time some idiot part of me was saying, Tom, you have 40 cows that will be standing in this same storm with nobody bringing them cheese. And the rest of me told that part to shut its mouth. When I came in the last time, she had moved. She was crouched over the food I'd dropped, going through it the way you'd go through it if you'd been rationing for 11 days, not greedily. That's the thing that stuck a knife in me, not greedily at all, but with a terrible care, breaking the hardtack into 7 small, even pieces before she touched a crumb herself. 7 pieces. She gave the cheese to the sick ones. There were 2 sick ones. I'd find that out by morning. She gave the cheese to the sick ones and she took nothing. And when the boy who'd put himself in front of me earlier tried to push his piece back at her, she shook her head once, hard, and he stopped. I have sat at tables with men who owned half this valley, and I never once saw anybody divide a thing as fairly as that woman divided 4 ounces of bad cheese on a dirt floor. You're not eating, I said. I ate this morning. A lie, and we both knew it, and she didn't bother to make it a good one, which is its own kind of pride. I sat down on the overturned stool, slow, careful, hands where she could see them. The children watched me the way prey watches. The 12-year-old, the one with the flour sack sling, watched me the hardest. She had her mother's caution, or this woman's, I didn't yet know which. That arm, I said to her gentle, how'd that happen? The girl's eyes flicked to Marisol, asking permission. And Marisol gave a small nod, and the girl said in English clear as a schoolhouse bell, the roof. A beam came down in the second storm. Mama said it, but we don't have a real splint. Mama, so one of them was hers, maybe. I can make a splint, I said. I've splinted more legs than I can count, mostly on animals, but bone is bone. I looked at Marisol. If you'll let me. That word let did something to her. I watched it land. I think nobody had asked that woman's permission for anything in a long time. I think people had been telling her, taking from her, deciding for her whole life, and a stranger using the word let in a falling down house in a killing storm was a thing she didn't have a defense built for. The iron went down the rest of the way. She set it against the wall, within reach. I noticed that within reach, and she said, "Her name is Carmen. She's mine. And the others." And here is where she looked at me for a long, long time, and I understood that everything, whether I stayed, whether she trusted me, whether 7 children lived to see spring, was balanced on what my face did when she answered. So I worked very hard to make my face do nothing. "Mine," she said. "All of them. Every one. Whatever you've decided about that already, you can keep it to yourself or you can take it back out in the snow. I'll be honest about something because I promised you honest." There was a moment, half a breath, where the old thing in me wanted to argue, wanted to say they can't all be yours, the two there, anyone can see. Where are their people? What happened? There's a story here you're not telling. The whole territory would have backed me. The whole territory would have called it common sense. I didn't say it. Not because I was a good man. I want to be clear that I wasn't, not yet, not that night. I didn't say it because I looked at the way the smaller of the 2 Apache children, a boy, maybe 5, was sleeping against the older one's side, with one fist curled into her collar. The bone-deep trust of a child who has been kept safe by exactly one person in a world that took everyone else. And I understood that whatever the true and complicated answer was to whose are they, the only answer that had kept them breathing for 11 days was the one she'd just given me. Mine. And I have learned since that there are truths that are correct and truths that are true, and they are not always the same truth, and a wise man learns to tell which one a moment is asking for. "All right," I said. That was it, 2 words again. We'd started in 2 words and we met in 2 words. She let out a breath I think she'd been holding for 11 days. The splint took an hour. I broke a slat off the one chair that still had 4 legs, and I shaved it smooth with my knife so it wouldn't bite. And Carmen, 12, brave, white around the mouth, let me set her arm proper without making a sound, though her good hand crushed my sleeve hard enough to leave marks I'd find the next day. Marisol held a candle stub so I could see. The fire was for the children. The candle was the only light she'd spend on herself, on us, on the work. And even then she kept glancing at it like she was counting how much was left. I learned things in that hour, the way you learn things in close work, not asked, just absorbed. I learned that Marisol Vega had come north from somewhere she wouldn't name, that her husband was a word she didn't say, that Carmen was 9 years younger than she should have been to be Marisol's blood, and so probably wasn't, though I never asked, and she never offered. I learned that 2 of the children had come to her in town, left, I gathered, or escaped, from a thing that had no good name, and that 2 more had come to her off the road, from a wagon party that the fever took, 3 graves and 4 orphans, and the 4 had been 5 until the youngest didn't make the 2nd week. I learned that the 2 Apache children had been the hardest and the last, and that I was never, not once in the years to come, going to get the full story of how she came to have them, and that I was going to learn to be at peace with not knowing, because the not knowing was a wall she'd built to keep them safe, and I was not going to be the man who pulled a brick out of it just to satisfy myself. Mostly I learned that she was not a saint. People want her to be a saint when I tell this. She wasn't. She was short-tempered and suspicious, and she'd lie to your face without a flicker if she thought it would protect them. And twice that night I watched her be sharp with a tired child in a way I didn't love. But she had looked at a world that handed her nothing and decided, somewhere along the line, with no audience and no reward, that she was going to be the wall between 7 children and that world for as long as her body held out. And she had been holding out alone, for 11 days, on no food, in a house with half a roof, against a storm that had killed grown men I'd known. Saints get help from heaven. She got nothing. That's better than a saint. That's a person. Somewhere past midnight the wind changed pitch, went from a roar to a high thin scream, which out here means the temperature's still dropping, means the worst of it isn't done, and the fire, which had been burning broken up furniture and a fence rail she dragged in God knows how, was getting low. We'd burned the slats off the broken chairs. We'd burned a shelf. I went around the room with my eyes counting what was left, and the answer was almost nothing. A table, the stool I was sitting on, the door we'd never get to close right anyhow. I took the pencil out again. This time I did the arithmetic on the back page of the ledger small, so she wouldn't see and worry. Hours of dark left, wood on hand, the rate the cold was winning. The numbers didn't come out kind. She saw me do it. Of course she did. She missed nothing. 11 days of being the only watch on the wall will do that. How bad, she said, not a question. She'd done her own arithmetic days ago. We'll make morning, I said, which was either true or a lie. I genuinely didn't know. And I think that was the first thing I'd said to her that she fully believed, because it was the first thing I'd said that I wasn't sure of, and a person who survived as much as she had can hear the difference between comfort and counting. She nodded. She looked at her children, all 7, the sick 2 and the watchful 2 and the small 2 and Carmen with her splinted arm, asleep now finally in a heap under my bedroll, and her too big coat, which she'd taken off and given to them, so that she sat there in the killing cold in a thin dress with her thin wrists. And she said something then that I have carried for the rest of my life, and that I'm going to give to you now, even though it's going to make me sound soft, because you've earned it the way she earned slow. If it comes to it, she said, very quiet, not looking at me, you take the 2 that can ride. You take Carmen, she's strong, and the boy Daniel, he won't slow you. You leave me the others. I'll keep the fire as long as there's a fire. She finally looked at me. I've already decided. Don't make me decide it twice. I want to tell you I had an answer ready. I didn't. I sat there in the screaming dark with the pencil in my hand and 7 sleeping children, and a woman who had just calmly arranged her own death so that some of them might live. And I understood that the decision the whole territory would spend the next year arguing about, my decision, the one they put my name to, wasn't mine at all. The fire was dying, and I was the only one in that room who'd been raised to lie about it. Marisol had told me her plan in 11 words, and then she'd gone quiet, the way people go quiet when they've handed you a weight and are watching to see if your knees buckle. Mine wanted to. I'll tell you what I did instead, because it's the most honest thing in this whole story. I got up off the stool and I picked the stool up and I broke it over my knee. She flinched, not at the noise, at the math. She'd been hoarding that stool the way you hoard the last match, and here was a stranger smashing it into the fire like wood was something a person could be careless with. I fed the pieces in one at a time, and the flame came up hungry and orange and threw her shadow huge against the broken wall, and I said, "We're not getting to morning by saving furniture." "That was the last seat in the house," she said. "Then we'll stand." I don't know why that was the thing that cracked her. People are strange about where their walls give. She'd faced me down with an iron and arranged her own death without a tremor, but a man burning the last stool, being foolish with the future on purpose, betting everything on the next 4 hours instead of rationing the inevitable, that undid something. Her chin went and she caught it hard, the way you catch a sneeze in church, and she turned her face to the dark so the children wouldn't see even though they were all asleep. I let her have it. I looked at my ledger and counted the floorboards we could pull up without bringing the wall down. That's a thing I can do, find a man or a woman, something to look at that isn't them while they fall apart. My mother taught me that too. Here is the part I have to get right, because it's the part everyone gets wrong when they retell it. They say I rode out into the storm to fetch help. They say it like it was brave. It wasn't brave, it was arithmetic. The fire would not last till dawn on floorboards, and 7 children and 1 woman could not last till dawn without it, and I had a horse standing in the lean of the house who was the only thing in 40 miles that could cover ground faster than a man could freeze. There was no decision in it. The decision came before. The decision was all right, 2 words, hours back, when I chose to make her problem mine. Everything after that was just consequence wearing the costume of choice. But there was a real decision that night, and it wasn't mine, and I want it on the record. When I told her I'd ride from my place, that I had a sledge there, and a draft team, and a stove that worked, and that I could be back inside 3 hours if the horse didn't go down, she said no. You won't make it. And then we've lost the horse and we're no better off. We're worse because they'll have watched a man die trying. She said it flat. She'd run the numbers too. Stay, keep the fire. If we're going to lose children tonight, we lose fewer with you here carrying wood than out there as a corpse. And there it was. 2 plans on the table, and both of them ended with somebody dying, and the only argument was about the arithmetic of who and how many. She wanted the sure smaller loss. I wanted the gamble. Neither of us was wrong. That's the thing nobody tells you about the hard ones, that the worst decisions aren't between right and wrong. They're between 2 kinds of grief, and you pick the one you think you can carry, and you find out later you were guessing. Marisol, I said, look at me. The horse is 15. He's covered worse ground than this in worse weather, and I have never once asked him for everything I'm about to ask him for. He's got one big ride left in him, and I'd rather spend it on this than on rounding up cows I'll sell to men who will never know his name. I put my hand out, palm up, not touching her, just open. I'm not asking your permission to die. I'm telling you I think I can live, and I think I can come back, and I'm asking you to keep them breathing for 3 hours so I have something to come back to. That's all. That's the whole job. 3 hours. She looked at my open hand for a long time. Then she did a thing I didn't expect. She didn't shake it. She took the wool blanket off her own shoulders, the one I'd brought in, the one she'd finally let herself use an hour past, and she wrapped it around my neck and tucked it down into my collar with those thin, quick fingers, rough as a man's from work, and she said, "Then live. Don't you dare make me have been right." I have been wrapped warm by exactly 2 women in my life. One was my mother. I rode out into the storm thinking about that, and it kept me upright longer than the blanket did. I'm not going to dress up the ride. There's no dressing up cold like that. It gets into the meat of you and starts shutting doors. You stop feeling your feet, which is fine, and then you stop feeling your hands, which is fine, and then you stop being afraid, which is not fine at all. That's the cold lying to you, telling you it's all right to rest. I knew the lie. I'd helped carry in 2 men who'd believed it. I kept my mind on numbers, counted the horse's strides between fence posts, counted the posts, counted backward from 100 and started again when I lost the thread, which was often. The pencil and ledger were in my breast pocket against my heart, and I couldn't have written a word with those hands, but knowing they were there was a kind of company. The horse, his name was Pilot. I should have said that sooner. A man owes a horse his name in a story like this. Pilot found the road when I couldn't. There's a stretch where the trail drops through a coulee and the wind couldn't reach us, and for about 4 minutes it was almost still, almost warm by comparison, and that was the most dangerous 4 minutes of the whole night because every part of me wanted to stop there. Pilot didn't stop. He'd been to my barn 10,000 times, and he wanted his own stall and his own grain, and he carried us both up out of that coulee on the strength of wanting to go home, which is to say he saved my life out of selfishness, and I have never thought less of him for it. Most lives that get saved by somebody who also wanted something. The wanting doesn't cheapen it. We made my place in something under 2 hours. I don't remember the last of it. I remember the barn lantern my hired man Eli kept burning, and I remember falling more than dismounting, and I remember Eli's face when he saw mine. And then I remember being inside with my hands in a basin of water that he swore was cool, though it felt like fire, screaming back into them. And I remember saying, before I could feel my own mouth, "Hitch the team. 7 kids and a woman at the Hannigan place. Now, Eli." Eli Brand had worked for me 4 years, and I'd never once seen him move the way he moved that night. He's a slow man by build and by choice, the kind who measures twice and cuts once and would measure a 3rd time if you let him, and I have cursed that slowness more mornings than I can count. That night it left him entirely. He had the draft team, Gus and Major, two big patient Belgians who didn't spook at weather, hitched to the sledge, and the sledge loaded with every blanket in the house, and the small sheet iron camp stove and a sack of grain and the water still warm from the kettle, all of it, before my hands had come back enough to hold the reins. He'd have come alone if I'd been a minute slower. I want his name in this. Eli Brandt. People forget the second man. The second man is half of every rescue and gets none of the songs. We went back out into it together, the two of us on the sledge bench with the Belgians steaming in front, and the storm had not improved its temper. But two men is more than one, and a sledge breaks trail where a horse breaks heart, and we had light now, two lanterns lashed to the front rail, and the great dumb strength of those two horses who didn't know enough to be afraid. Halfway back Eli said the only thing he said the whole ride. He said, "The Hannigan place, whose kids?" And I knew what he was asking. I'd known Eli 4 years, and I knew the country he came up in, same as mine, same coffee, same certainties. He wasn't a cruel man. He was a man who'd been handed the same coin I had and never weighed it either. I thought about lying. I thought about neighbors' kids, passing through kids, something that wouldn't make him do the arithmetic the territory would want him to do. And then I thought about Marisol breaking that hardtack into 7 even pieces, and the moccasins set neat by the fire to dry, and I was too tired and too cold to be a coward. 7 of them, I said. 2 are Apache. The woman's not anybody's wife, and they're not any of them her blood that I can tell. She's been keeping them alive alone for 11 days. That's whose kids. Eli was quiet for a long stretch. The Belgians blew steam. The lantern swung. Then he said 11 days in that house, and then after another while, alone. Alone. He didn't say anything about Apache. He didn't say anything about whose or how or what people would think. He'd taken the same 11 days and the same alone that I'd taken, and somewhere in that quiet he'd weighed his coin and found it lighter than he'd been told. He just clicked his tongue at Gus and Major to lean into it, and we went faster. I have thought a great deal in the years since about how fast a man's whole inheritance can fall away when you put a real person in front of him in the cold. It doesn't always. I've seen it not. But it can, and it did, on a sledge bench at 2 in the morning, in a man who measures everything twice, and that's a thing worth more than the rescue itself, in the long arithmetic. The kids lived that night. But something in Eli got remade that night too. And that's the kind of thing that keeps living after the snow's long gone. We came over the last rise, and I looked for the smoke, and there wasn't any. I want you to sit in that with me for 1 second, because I did. We came over the rise, and the Hannigan place was a black shape in a white world with no thread of smoke rising off it, and every door the cold had been opening in me slammed at once. 3 hours. I'd said 3 hours. It had been closer to 4. Eli got the Belgians down the slope faster than was safe. I was off the sledge before it stopped, and I hit the door with no latch, and it gave again, like a thing that had given up, and I went in sideways into a cold that was almost the cold outside, into near dark, the fire down to a sullen orange eye in the ash. And Marisol Vega was on her feet between me and the children with the fire iron in both hands, the exact way she'd met me the first time, except now her lips were blue and she was swaying and she could barely lift it. And she got out, in a voice with no breath behind it, "Get back," before she saw it was me. She'd kept the fire. She'd kept it down to the last red coal, and she'd had nothing left to feed it, and she'd done the only thing left to do, which was put her body between the children and the cold and the dark, and whatever came through that door, one more time, on no warmth and no sleep, and no food for going on 12 days, because she had decided a long time ago that the wall doesn't get to lie down. I found out after that she'd burned the door frame. She'd burned the splint slats off a chair leg I'd left. She'd burned her own shoes. I found them. What was left, charred at the toe, because shoes burn and feet can be wrapped in rag, and a child's life was worth more than her ability to walk. She'd burned her shoes. I caught her as she went down. The iron hit the floor with a sound I still hear, and the children woke and saw the lanterns and the doorway full of men and warm air rolling in, and Carmen, 12, splinted arm. The watchful one, Carmen, looked at me and said the first thing any of them had said directly to me in hope rather than fear. She said, "You came back." I said I would, I told her, which wasn't quite true. I'd said I thought I could, which is a different and smaller promise, but Carmen didn't need the small version right then, and neither did I. Eli got the stove lit and the blankets distributed and the grain water warmed while I held Marisol by the dying fire and chafed her hands and her bare feet. And her feet are a thing I'm not going to describe to you in full, except to say that the cold had been in them a long time, and I knew, holding them, that this rescue had a cost already locked in that no sledge could undo. She came around enough to fight me. Of course she did. She came around, and the first thing she did was try to get up and count the children, and I held her down and counted them out loud for her instead. All 7, pointing, nomming the ones I knew, Carmen, Daniel, the little one Daniel guarded, and making up nothing, just numbers and names, 7, all here, all breathing, while Eli moved among them with blankets like a slow, gentle bear. "You came back," she said, same words as Carmen. I suppose hope only has so many sentences. "Eli came back," I said. "I just rode the horse. You kept them. You kept all of them, 12 days. I had her thin blue hands in mine, and I was rubbing warmth into them, and I found I couldn't see her very well, and it wasn't the dark. I have buried men I liked," I told her, which made no sense to say, and I said it anyway. "And I never cried about any of it, so I don't know what you've done to me." She didn't answer that. She was looking past me at the children getting warm, at Daniel pulling a blanket up over the little one, at Carmen testing her splinted arm in the new firelight, at the 2 she would never explain to me curled into the heat with their worn moccasins finally drying by a fire that wasn't going to go out. Her face in that light did the thing it hadn't done once the whole night, not under the iron, not arranging her death, not wrapping me warm and sending me into the storm. It came apart quietly all the way. And I learned the last thing I was going to learn that night, which is that the strongest people you'll ever meet aren't strong because they don't break. They're strong because they decide, every single hour, exactly when they're allowed to, and she had decided, 12 days back, that she was not allowed to break until every last child was warm and counted and safe. So she hadn't. For 12 days she hadn't. She broke now, she'd earned now. I held her hands and let her, and Eli kept the children warm and didn't look over, and outside the storm screamed itself out against a house that, for the first time in 11 days, was winning. That should be where it ends, the warm part, the part people like. But you've stayed with me this long, so I'll tell you the truth about morning, which is that morning is when the hard decision actually arrived. Not the storm, not the ride. Those were just weather and arithmetic. The hard one came with the sun, when the snow stopped and the world went blinding white and clean, and a rider appeared on the eastern rise where I'd come from, and then another behind him, and Marisol saw them through the broken north wall and went rigid in my arms and said, in a voice gone back to iron, "Who did you tell?" Because I had told someone. Of course I had. To get a sledge and a team and a second man, you tell someone. Word moves. And word in that country in that year about a lone woman with 7 children, 2 of them Apache, no husband, no story she'd give a word like that didn't just bring help. There were 3 of them by the time they reached the dooryard, and I knew 2. The one in front was Sheriff Reuben Das, who I'd known 11 years and trusted maybe 9 of them. Behind him rode Wendell Prout, who held the note on half the spreads in the valley and had never in his life ridden out before noon for anybody, which told me the third man mattered. The third man I didn't know. Town suit under a town coat, the wrong gloves for the weather, a leather case across his saddle, a clerk's posture, an agency man or close enough to make Marisol's word for it the same. She'd gone to the doorway. I tried to keep her by the stove, her feet, her color, 12 days, and she'd looked at me with such flat finality that I stood aside, and she'd taken up the fire iron one more time, and she'd gone and stood in her own doorway in rag-wrapped feet that couldn't hold her weight, and held the iron across her body the way she'd held it at me, and waited. I went and stood beside her, not in front, beside. I want that distinction on the record because it's the whole thing. I had spent the night learning that the worst thing you can do to a person like her is decide for her, take the weight out of her hands as if her hands weren't the strongest thing in the county. So I didn't stand in front of her like a shield, and I didn't stand behind her like a witness. I stood beside her, and I let the 3 men on horses see that there were 2 of us in the door now, and that one of us was Tom Calder, who they knew, who owned 400 head and a clear title and a name that carried, and who had apparently decided something about this woman that they'd have to ride through to undo. Das touched his hat. Tom, a question in it. Reuben. Prout didn't bother with courtesies. We had word there were children out here in distress, Indian children among them, unattended or near to it. His eyes went past me to the dark of the house, counting the way I'd counted except he was counting evidence. There are arrangements for that, proper ones. The agency, the mission school down at. They're not unattended, I said. A woman alone in a falling down house in the worst storm in 9 years, Prout said. With 7 children she can't account for, 2 of them clearly not. She accounted for them to me. I kept my voice level, which cost me. All 7, last night, while she was burning her own shoes to keep them warm and you were asleep in a bed, Wendell, she accounted for every one of them with her body. That's the only accounting that's kept a single one of them breathing for 12 days. You want to bet her one, you weren't here to take it. Here is where I have to slow down, because this is the part they tell wrong, and the way they tell it wrong matters. The story that got around, the one they argue about in 3 counties, the one that put my name on a thing. The story says Tom Calder faced down the agency and the bank and the law in a doorway and won. Tom Calder stared them down and they turned their horses and rode off, and the woman kept her children, and that was that. And isn't that fine? Isn't that a thing a man should be proud of? That's not what happened. What happened was uglier and slower and truer, and it didn't get settled in a doorway, and I didn't win anything that morning. What I did that morning was buy time. That's all. That's the whole heroic deed. I bought a frightened woman with frozen feet about 3 hours, and I did it not with a gun and not with a stare but with the most boring weapons there are. I lied about paperwork. I stood in that doorway and I told Wendell Prout and the agency clerk that these children were already spoken for, that I had, the previous autumn, taken Marisol Vega on as housekeeper, and the children as wards under my own roof, that the storm had caught her out at the Hannigan place moving the last of her things, that there were arrangements on file with a lawyer in Helena whose name I gave them, a man named Aldous Wren who did in fact exist, and who I did in fact owe a favor, and who would, I prayed, back the lie if a letter reached him before they did. None of it was true that morning. I made it true over the following month with a real lawyer and real ink and more money than I'll tell you. But that morning it was a structure of pure air, and I built it standing up in the cold in front of a sheriff who I could see did not believe a word of it. And Reuben Das, 11 years I'd known him, 9 of them I'd trusted. Reuben sat his horse and listened to me lie, and he looked at the doorway, at the woman who couldn't stand and was standing anyway, at the iron she could barely lift, and then he looked at me for a long moment, and I watched a man decide which of his oaths he was going to keep that day, because he couldn't keep all of them. "That right, Tom," he said. "Not a question this time. An offer. He was offering to believe me. He was offering to write housekeeper and wards and arrangements in Helena in his head and call it true, the way I'd called mine true the night before, because there are truths that are correct and truths that are true, and a good lawman, it turns out, can sometimes tell which one a morning is asking for." "That's right," I said. Then I rode out for nothing. He turned his horse. "Wendell, there's no abandonment here. Man's got a housekeeper and her wards weathered a storm in a property he glanced at me, evidently means to repair. That's not a matter for the agency, and it's surely not a matter for the bank. He looked at the clerk. "You can write that down or not, suits me." Prute's face went through several weathers. He had no standing to push it. The bank's interest was in the title to the Hannigan place, and I let him understand, in about 6 quiet words on the side, that I'd buy that note before the week was out and he could choose to make an enemy of me or a customer. He chose customer. Men like Prute always choose customer. Clerk wrote nothing. He'd ridden a long, cold way for an arrest and a tally and a wagon load of children for a mission school that ate children like that and gave back something hollow, and he was being sent home empty, and he didn't like it, and his not liking it was the only honest thing he brought up that rise. He turned his horse last. As he went he said to no one, to all of us, "There'll be a record made." And there was. There's a record somewhere in Helena that says ugly things about all of this. Records mostly say ugly things. They're written by the people who weren't in the room. Then they were 3 shapes going back down the white slope into the white morning, and the only sound was the Belgians shifting in their traces, and Marisol breathing like each breath was a thing she had to lift. She lowered the iron. She turned to me, and she didn't thank me. I want that on the record too, because it's the most respectful thing she ever did to me. She said, "Now I owe you, and I don't like owing." "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you a lie the size of a house and a lawyer in Helena and a note on a property and whatever it cost you in that man's face to say housekeeper about me." Her jaw was tight. "I'll pay it. Don't tell me I won't. I'll decide what I owe." And then smaller, the iron in her hand pointing now at the floor. "But not the children. The children aren't part of the debt. Whatever I have to do to settle with you, it doesn't touch them. Say it." "It doesn't touch them," I said. "Say it like the lawyer's listening." So I said it like the lawyer was listening, the whole formal shape of it. The children are not collateral and not consideration and not part of any arrangement between us. And I watched her file it away somewhere behind her ribs where she kept the things that let her sleep. And only then did she let me help her back to the stove and off her ruined feet. I'm going to tell you about the feet now, because I promised honest and because the bittersweet of this isn't in the doorway. It's in what the cold kept. She lost 2 toes off the left foot and 1 off the right, and walked with a list for the rest of the years I knew her, and on cold mornings, and we have a great many cold mornings. She'd go quiet and white around the mouth the way Carmen had gone setting that arm, and she'd never once say it hurt, and I learned not to ask. She'd burned her shoes for the children, and the children never knew it, and she'd have taken the iron to me if I'd told them. That was the cost that got locked in before any sledge could come. The rescue worked. Everybody lived. And a woman walks crooked into her grave for it and counted it cheap and was right too, and it breaks my heart that she was right too. That's the part the doorway story leaves out. The doorway story is clean. Feet aren't clean. Feet are what it actually costs. The arrangement became real the way air becomes a house slowly, with money and paper and stubbornness. Aldous Wren backed the lie and then made it true. God keep him. With adoption papers for the 4 I could get papers for and a guardianship dodge for the 2 I couldn't. The 2 Apache children. Because the law in that year and that place would not let a thing like a clean adoption happen for them. And we did what people have always done when the law is too small for the truth. We built around it. Carmen took my name when she was old enough to choose it, and the others took it or didn't as suited them. And Daniel, the boy who'd put himself in front of me that first night, Daniel kept his own. Said his own name was the last thing his own people gave him, and he wasn't giving it to anybody, not even me. And I respected that more than I can say and told him so. And he and I were all right after that in the way that men are all right. Marisol never married me. People assume. People always assume. They want the doorway story to end with a wedding because a wedding is a shape they understand, a way to make a woman's strength belong to a man so they can stop being unsettled by it. She wouldn't have it, and I never asked, and we ran that place and those children side by side, beside, the way I'd stood in the door for 19 years, and what we were to each other doesn't have a word in the language, and I've made my peace with the absence of the word. Not everything true needs a word. The moccasins by the fire didn't need a word. So why does it echo? That's the thing you came for, isn't it? The title's promise, his decision echoed across Montana. And I've spent 3 nights worth of getting you to the place where I can be honest about it. It echoed because of the lie. Not the rescue. Rescues happen all the time and the snow swallows them. It echoed because a man with a clean title and a known name stood in a doorway and lied to a sheriff and a banker and an agency clerk, on purpose, with his whole reputation as the stake, in order to keep 2 Apache children out of a mission school and 5 orphans out of the system and 1 crooked-footed woman out of whatever they'd have called the thing they'd have done to her. And the sheriff let him, and that part got around. That a lawman had looked at the law and looked at the room and chosen the room. People heard about that and it did something to them. Some of them it made furious. Wendell Prout told the story for years as a scandal, a white man gone soft, a woman who should have been sorted, children who should have been placed. The clerk's record in Helena says worse. But some of them, and this is the echo, this is the actual echo, some of them heard a sheriff chose the room and they filed it away the way Marisol filed things behind her ribs. And the next time one of them stood in their own doorway with their own impossible thing on the other side of it, they remembered that a man was allowed to choose the room, that it had been done, that the sky hadn't fallen. Reuben Das carried that the rest of his career. I know of 2 other times he chose the room and I suspect there were more. Eli Brandt told the sledge ride and the burned shoes at every branding for 30 years, and I watched young men's faces change hearing it. Watched the coin they'd been handed get weighed in real time, the way mine had. Carmen, my Carmen, splinted arm, the watchful one, Carmen grew up and became the kind of person who stands in doorways for other people, and she'll tell you flat that she learned it watching her mother hold an iron she couldn't lift. That's the echo. It was never one decision in one doorway. It was the permission, the proof that it could be done and survived. A thing like that doesn't ring once. It rings down the line, person to person, doorway to doorway, and you can't trace where it stops because it doesn't. I get more credit for it than I'm owed. I always have. They put my name on it, Calder's Stand. Some of them called it, and I let them for a while because the credit kept the children safe. A thing folded into Tom Calder's reputation was a thing Wendell Prout couldn't pick back up. But I'll tell you the truth now here at the end, where she can't take the iron to me for it. I didn't make the decision. I just refused to let hers be the only one on the table. She decided 12 days before I ever broke that door that she was going to be the wall. Everything I did, the ride, the lie, the lawyer, the 19 years, was me deciding to be a second wall, so the first one wouldn't have to stand alone anymore. That's all a good man is in the end, not the wall. The second wall, the one that says you don't have to hold it by yourself. She died on a cold morning, which I always knew she would. The cold had owned a piece of her since the Hannigan place, and it came to collect the rest the way debts do. Daniel was there, and Carmen, and 3 of the others, and me. She'd outlived Prout and outlived Das and outlived the mission school itself, which closed in disgrace, and she got to see that, got to read me the notice with something fierce and satisfied in her ruined morning voice. The last thing she did, and I've told this to maybe 4 people, and I'm not sure why I'm telling you except that you stayed, and she earned witnesses even now, the last thing she did was count. She was past speaking by the end, but her eyes went around the room, slow, deliberate, one face at a time. The children grown and the grandchildren small and Daniel holding the littlest of them, and I watched her count. I watched her get to the end of the count and find the number whole. Everyone present. Everyone breathing. The wall could lie down now. It had held. I had my ledger in my breast pocket against my heart, the way it had been the night I rode through the storm. I didn't take it out. There was nothing left to count that she hadn't already counted better. I just held her hand, the thin hand, rough as a man's, that had broken hardtack into 7 even pieces on a dirt floor a lifetime before, and I let her finish. She got the number right. She always did. I still keep the moccasins, worn down past sense, set by my own fire now, where they've been for years. I don't know why I dried them that first night instead of throwing them out. except that somebody in that freezing house had set them there so neat, so careful, as if small dignities still mattered when everything else was gone. And I have come to believe that's the whole thing. That's all any of it ever was. Somebody refusing to stop caring about the small dignities. A pair of moccasins, dried by a fire that wasn't allowed to go out.